it's more like the calm before the storm. It's people jockeying for position. I don't think anybody's put their cards on the table yet. And to be frank with you, I think the fangs and the claws will come out in June when the pressure starts growing for us on ambition especially. It's been interesting listening to how much is being done in countries, both developing and developed, to mitigate and adapt to climate change, the renewable energy. But interestingly, yesterday when I was listening to how much all these countries are doing, and to me it just underscored how much more needs to be done. I was pleasantly surprised by how much is being done. When you listen to every country saying, but it's clear that it's not enough. It's clear that the serious conversation hasn't started yet. But at least it makes for putting us in a better mood for the conversation when it happens. That's why, as far as AOSIS is concerned, we are maintaining up. We see no reasons to ease up on the pressure and to change positions. If anything, we're going to increase the pressure with the news from the Mauna Loa Observatory that this month, that was last month, we're now in May, we expect to reach 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. So as far as we're concerned, we would rather prepare according to that news rather than what's going here.
AOSIS traditionally, when you look at the statements at the end of the last few major climate summits and the statement ahead of this particular meeting, have taken quite a clear and quite a strong line in terms of the levels of ambition required. You're not sort of beating about the bush, as they say in the UK. Who needs to take the leadership here? There's always this kind of binary divide, isn't there? Developed or developing. But can you pinpoint some particular countries that you would like to see come out and say, this is where we stand?
First of all, in general, we talk about all major emitters. We don't really talk about an North-South divide now the way it is. Although we still, as part of G77, we still abide by the CBDR. There are people who are saying maybe we need to relook at what the CBDR means. We start hearing people talking about differentiation and that sort of thing. But as far as we're concerned, no one is doing enough yet. We would like to see, if ever the U.S. has been in a position to do something, we think it is now. The U.S. president doesn't have to stand re-election. We think if ever they can step up to the plate, now's the time to do it. And we've also heard on the outside of the negotiations that the U.S. and China are going to work together on climate change. We're still waiting for a definition of what that means and whether it is going to impact on the talks, because this is outside of the negotiations. But we think now that we're changing changing track in a sense, in that where we're trying to negotiate the new 2015 agreement, maybe it's a time for everybody to stand back, take stock, and do what is needed, especially with the news that's coming from the scientific community. And we've seen climate change impact the U.S. more and more. At the same time as we're reading of how China domestically is probably the country that's doing the most, although it's obviously far from enough. So we have to look at it within the context of all that is happening. As far as AOSIS is concerned, we're going to continue, especially the pre-2020 emissions gap. We think that has to be addressed. We're going to press not to wait for 2015 agreement. We have to, as much as we can now, so that by the time we get to agreeing on a new protocol or whatever you want to call it, at least we'll have some serious ambition locked in, rather than wait until then, because that will delay things further. So we don't see it as putting things off to 2020, let alone 2015. We are going to continue with all the pressure. In fact, it's going to increase.
Can you give us an idea of what kind of leverage the OASIS group of countries have? Because you're very vocal within these talks, but you do represent, all of you, small islands, small economies, ones that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily associate with being, major diplomatic players, or ones who, behind the scenes can twist some arms. So what kind of leverage do you have within this context?
Climate change itself. It's getting so much worse. In fact, you can see now an argument developing as to who is more vulnerable. There are a lot of countries that are vulnerable. We're still uniquely vulnerable in that we're the only group where whole countries will disappear. But I'll give an example that I gave in Doha. Let's take the Green Climate Fund. We've been talking about a Green Climate Fund for $100 billion. There's been delays. It's a fund that's operational without any money. People are saying $100 billion is a lot of money to find. And then one storm hits the U.S., Sandy. And 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, get $61 billion from Congress. All of a sudden, it's in their face. And all of a sudden, when you look at that, $100 billion doesn't look like that much money. And I think this is bringing it home. All the economic arguments is also hitting home. The science now is finally now having a better effect, I think, even in the U.S., regardless of what Congress thinks or does. I think that as far as the population and the polls show that people are beginning to wake up to what is happening. And we are engaging with more and more groups here. We're strengthening our links with, for example, the LDCs. Interestingly, we're seeing new groups come up. And when we talk to these new groups, we're seeing more and more countries outside of the traditional groups like African LDCs who are talking more or less the same language we are talking about. So we think it is climate change itself which will help us, where we can say we were right all along. We're not here to say I told you so, but and when you listen to statements, more and more statements sound like AOSIS statements.
Why do you think there are more groups coming together? What do you think motivates them sort of converging on particular positions?
Obviously, they're not happy with the way the negotiations have gone so far. And people are trying, maybe through different groups, to add to the pressure. It makes things more confusing. It makes you have more groups to have bilaterals with and to try and coordinate positions, and you're never too sure who is talking for which group. I remember I was in the hall just now, and as I was leaving, I heard someone saying, I'm talking for ALBA and also for the like-minded developing group. And I just smiled at that and said, it's getting more and more confusing now, so you're never too sure who they're talking for. But I can only hope that if the US and China are coming together to work together on climate change, it's because they realize that they cannot continue on the path they have so far. And these are the 2 biggest players, the two biggest polluters, two biggest single polluters, and hopefully that will translate into something positive in the talks. We're yet to find out. I certainly am not going to hold my breath over that. If I do, I'll probably die of suffocation before I drown. It's for them to prove that as we head into Warsaw. But also, this is one of the reasons also, you see, AOSIS is calling for a ministerial in Warsaw on ambition, to try and get political momentum to sort of kickstart and say, no, we have to go down the political ambition road. We don't want to get the issue of the emissions gap, the need for deeper emissions cuts, sidelined by all the other issues that we have to look at as we negotiate a new agreement. We have to make sure that this, as far as the AOSIS is concerned, this stays at the fore, this is the crux, because this will determine how good an agreement we get in 2015 if we do get one.
How frustrating is it that some of the aspects of the talks, such as the Green Climate Fund or perhaps the technology mechanism, are actually in one sense fairly easy to implement and get rolling, and there just seems to be a bit of stasis and limbo at the moment?
I think they are easier, quotation marks, compared to emissions. It's all compared to emissions and money. So, sometimes it's a bit of a distraction, because even if you're going to talk about the technological side, and you still need money, you still come down to who's going to pay for it. Right? It's easier in that sense, in that the most difficult thing is, the trip to the dentist is the emissions cuts. But one would hope that the economics of climate change, even on the emissions side, is getting home. Obviously not enough for there to be ambition. Whether people are going to surprise us in June, I don't know. Because everyone's holding their cards close to their chests here. Not AOCs, we've always been upfront. We always have one clear, open agenda. Everybody knows where we stand. We never hide anything. We've got too much to lose.
And just sort of, finally looking ahead to I guess there is a tendency to look at these big conferences at the end of the year to solve problems, and often they might just cloud those problems over. But in terms of Poland, what do you really need to see on the table after June to be able to work with as a negotiator and as a diplomat?
First of all, the choice of Poland wasn't exactly inspiring. Right? Of all the countries in Europe that could have been chosen, that choice, but that was their choice, and we have to live with it. And I think Poland should look to Doha and find that we were disappointed. Everybody was disappointed with Doha. And just 1 year down the road, the situation in climate change is that much worse. But we're just going to maintain the pressure. We, in fact, increase the pressure. We're still going to go. They know us. They see us where they can hear us coming from over the horizon. Emissions, emissions, emissions. Finance is important, but as we've always said, the more mitigation you have, the less adaptation you have to do. When you fail in adaptation and mitigation, we end up in loss and damage. And the more they hold back on emissions, the stronger the pressure for loss and damage is going to get. And for us, and it's like to clarify for EOSIS, it's never been loss and damage as compensation as such. It's more like an insurance mechanism, something to replace the traditional way that insurance works, because it cannot serve the purposes of the scale of the damage and the destruction we're talking about here. That's how AOC started, the loss and damage. But one way of easing pressure from developing countries on issues like loss and damage is through more emissions to try and prevent damage. But we've reached a stage in climate change now that whatever we do, however you cut your emissions, there's going to be a certain amount of damage that's going to be done. So it's still an issue that will remain on the table, but it's not the issue. Mitigation, emissions gap, ambition, what the UNEP report identified, we're looking at also the World Bank as a report. Hopefully the World Bank will change its financing. It's the way it finances projects to reflect what itself has been saying to help out here. But the message is still the same. It's the mitigation ambition. They all have to step up to the plate, whether it's the US on the one side or whether it's the Chinas on the other side, whether it's the basic countries. They all have to step up to the plate and do what we think. We've heard of what everybody's doing over the past 2 days. I think everybody agrees it's not enough. So I think the message from here is not that we're doing fine in our countries, especially in mitigation and in renewable energy, which is just one part of the equation. It's that, as I said, I think it has highlighted even more starkly how much more needs to be done.